I want to start off with a little criticism about the electric universe kind of viewpoint. Um, that viewpoint uh, is it involves this concept of vortexes as kind of like the fundamental unit of reality. It's kind of like electric vortexes. I don't think that the most fundamental aspect of reality is something like a vortex. What this is a challenge to contemporary physics. The electric universe people are not satisfied with contemporary physics. And so the alternative is the electric universe viewpoint. I'm going to explain that the problems with the electric universe viewpoint are the exact same as contemporary physics. For example, in physics, you have this concept of light being either a particle or a wave. So those are words that have some kind of a meaning to someone, but they don't have any meaning to me. And I don't know why they should have any meaning. They're completely meaningless because they're undefined, really. They're really undefined. When you say the word particle, are you referring to something that is physical? What makes up a particle? You know, do smaller particles make up that particle? If so, then what makes up that particle? See, just saying the word particle doesn't denote a fundamental unit of anything. It is just simply a meaningless word. The same goes for the word wave. When you talk about waves, there must be some sort of medium that the wave is progressing through. And when you say the word medium, what is that made of? What is the medium made of? Is it made of particles as well? And then if it is made of particles, if there is a medium, and if it is made of particles, then what are the particles made out of? Smaller particles? Well, what are those particles made out of? You get the point. And the reason that doesn't work at all is because it is physicalism. It is a kind of metaphysical belief that is illogical and kind of new to science, only within the past few decades. In the past, before, I would say, postmodernism, science was mostly monist. And none of these monist scientists would have ever suggested anything so ludicrous as what we see today. The thing that's wrong with physicalism is that in the process of creating categories, ontological categories, or sets, logical sets, the categories we end up with are physical and non-physical. That's what we refer to. That's what science refers to. Those are the categories science refers to, and philosophy. The problem with physicalism is that it only explains the non-physical as being like constructs, illusions of the human mind, and do not really exist out there. The reason they're constructs is because the category of non-physical is a subset of the category physical. So the non-physical category is explained, but the physical category isn't. when you ask a physicist to explain the physical category, when you say, what does the word physical mean? What is physical? What is something what are physical things made out of? They attempt to put that physical category into a subset of the category physical. They try and put the category into a subset of itself. And that is a logical problem called infinite regress. The electric universe view is exactly that. There's no difference whatsoever. Especially when you use the terms like vortex. Vortex is a pattern of movement like a wave. And a pattern of movement requires a medium. And every time I ask an electric universe person what this medium is made out of, they always say physical particles. Okay, so now we know that the vortex itself is actually not the fundamental unit. It's actually the particles in the medium of the vortex. But then what are the particles made out of? Are they made out of smaller vortexes? So it just causes infinite regress, and it is not logical. There is a solution. It's a very easy solution. The solution to end infinite regress is to define your categories as essence and substance, or you can use whatever name you want. People name things all the time. Doesn't matter what names you use. It's the concepts that matter. If you take this category and you define it as making up this category, and this category is defined as being made up of this category, then you have a situation in which you're not going to end up with infinite regress. You could say, well, what's that made out of? Anything at all that you could even possibly imagine, even if it's in your imagination, or if it's a construct, if it's an experience, something subjective. You could say, what is that made out of? It doesn't matter, because get rid of the categories physical and non-physical, and use substance and essence, because all a substance is something that's made out of essences, and all an essence is something that makes up substances. Yes, this is just wordplay, but this is for most of human history the way that human beings have learned to understand the nature of being. And it's called monism. It doesn't lead to infinite regress. Okay, so now I want to talk about geometry. Geometry in monism is something that is not merely a construct of the mind, it exists out there. So, for example, if you and I weren't here, if humanity wasn't here, then there would be no one around to say the word geometry. So the word geometry wouldn't exist. But things would be around, and they would have certain shapes. Why did they have certain shapes? Because geometry exists out there in the objective world. Because of monism. Geometry is very important to this topic. The concept of geometry is very important to this topic because as you go through the process of reduction, well, what is that made of? What is that made of? What is that made of? You need to end up at some place. If you just keep going down the rabbit hole, it's infinite regress. If you're allowed to end up somewhere, then that is that's how you solve the issue. That's how you determine what is truly the fundamental unit of reality. I would say that it is something like geometry. Um, so, and another point I want to make is that no matter what we talk about, no matter what we name stuff, um, nothing out there in reality is going to change. The discussion aspect is only changing our perception and understanding of reality. We're not assigning things to reality, we're just trying to make sense of it. And that is how you make sense of it, is ending up somewhere, going through the reduction process and ending up somewhere. You can call it whatever you want, but you need to end up somewhere. And I suggest a good place to end up is geometry itself, just a shape, the existence of a shape. I think that's what fields are, is just a shape, a single shape actually, a single shape. And I think that I can describe the shape. Well, the thing is that I'm not really describing it, I'm just perceiving it, and we're having a discussion about it so we can all understand it. Now, Ken Wheeler is a really smart guy, and I admire him, and he would know what I'm talking about because he talks about monism and he talks about metaphysics. And really all where we would differ is what we call things. So we're past that. We don't need to worry about that. Just make sure we understand each other's concepts. Ken Wheeler has some ideas about the geometry, and that's really where we're at. Really, the task at hand is to, as accurately as possible, perceive and understand the geometry and its mechanisms. And that's pretty much it. And so this argument is just basically what I'm going to say next is, well, your shape is wrong, but my shape is right. And I mean, these shapes, they're very similar shapes. There's slight differences to the shapes, and that's really all that's left to do is just kind of just banter back and forth and determine what the actual shape is. I've gained some insight into field geometry. My initial observation was that, hey, there's this thing called stereographic projection, and it kind of looks like magnetic field, like, iron filings on it with the magnet. It kind of looks like that. And so if you take a globe, a sphere, with two sets of orthogonal lines, orthogonal meaning that where they intersect it's 90 degrees, so it's like a cage, like a sphere grid, a spherical grid, and you project that stereographically onto a wall or a screen, then the shape is representative of the electromagnetic field, both the electric field and the magnetic field together being orthogonal to each other. And also, the next thing I noticed was that all of the characteristics of the mathematical concept of stereographic projection matched all of the concepts of how fields are defined. And Well, fields aren't defined in like the metaphysical sense. I would say that a field is an essence, and geometry. That would be my definition of a field. And geometry that exists objectively out there, and I think it does. Uh, it's a force. It's a physical force, and those forces happen simply because of the way it's shaped. Let me explain. Stereographic projection of a three-dimensional sphere onto a two-dimensional plane, that's a kind of a transformation of a 3D object to a 2D plane, okay? However, the field is a 3D object, and there are models of a fourth dimensional sphere, a hypersphere, being stereographically projected as a three-dimensional object. There are multiple models of this, and I think that one of those models is a more accurate depiction of field geometry. If you go to YouTube and look up videos on like hop vibration, then you see animations of these fibrous shapes, and they often represent them as moving around because there's a lot going on in these shapes. And in some way, you could see how it's similar to a torus. However, I think that the stringy, fibrous shape that all the fibers extend, for infinity throughout the universe, with a specific center point, and all of those characteristics, I think that is much more accurate than for example, a torus. And the whole model where the line spirals into the center of the torus, I don't think that's accurate. So when you look at the ferrocell, you don't see lines that are orthogonal to each other, like normal electric field lines or magnetic field lines. So we can postulate that maybe those lines we're seeing aren't really electric lines or magnetic lines. So going back to the grid, the sphere grid, those are straight lines on a sphere, and the reason they become distorted and curved is because they're being projected. It's a transformation from a higher dimension to a lower dimension, and so it appears to be distorted, while the lines as they exist in their authentic form aren't curved at all. They're perfectly straight. And so if you look at a normal picture of electromagnetism, you can see how it's the lines are those straight orthogonal lines on a normal grid. But when you look at a ferrocell, you see a spiral pattern, which is different than the stereographic projected straight lines, orthogonal lines. If you take that same sphere and take off those straight lines, well, if you take off those orthogonal lines and you put on what's called a loxodrome, which is actually a straight line, but it's just at a different angle. So you could say the electric field lines are at 0 degrees to the pole, and the magnetic lines are at 90 degrees to the pole, or vice versa, whatever. And so a loxodrome is at a different angle than 90 degrees or 0 degrees. It's somewhere in between. Hypothetically, you could imagine an entire continuum of angles. But when this loxodrome is stereographically projected. It appears as a shape on the 2D screen, and that shape is exactly the same shape as the shape you see through a ferrocell. When you take the sphere and you turn it on its side and you stereographically project the side of it, that image looks the same as when you look through you turn the magnet on its side and you look at it through the ferrocell. So still, even though it's a different angle, those lines are representative, or actually stereographic projection represents the lines seen on a ferrocell. So I think that this hop fibration, or one of these other models, there's multiples of them, I think that is a better representation of the geometry. And really, that's the only thing that matters, is identifying the precise geometry, because we already know coherence happens. We already know the general mechanism. It's self-similar and hierarchical. The field's spin is a characteristic that is inherent to all matter. When you throw a magnet towards another magnet, they align themselves and snap together. There's really not much more you have to know other than, well, what's the exact precise geometry? So that's my take on it.